In this lesson we're going to look at the alkanes. Now this is an organic group of chemicals that forms a homologous series. And a homologous series is a series of compounds with the same general formula. Now I'll explain what that means in a minute, and I'll give you the general formula for these later on. But first of all, let's just have a look at the first few members of this series and their structural formulas. And in the case of the alkanes, carbon forms bonds with itself and with hydrogen. So let's look at the first one in this list, which is methane. Okay. These are the structural formulas, and each of these lines represents a single covalent bond. And we'll add the other hydrogen atoms to the rest, and then we'll name them. So you might have thought, for example, that they'd use a totally systematic naming system for this. For example, you might have thought they'd call this monane because there's one carbon, diane or biane because there's two here, triane because there's three, and quadane because there's four. That would kind of make sense, but that's not the way it goes. So the first four in all of these series are a little bit trickier to remember. After that, as you'll see, they become much easier because they just adopt the names used, for example, in polygons. But so the first one in the list is methane, as I just mentioned. Notice the ane. That's the key word here that tells you that it belongs to the alkane group. And then you've got ethane. That's two carbon atoms. Then you've got propane. That tells you it's three carbon atoms. Then you've got butane. And then after that it just becomes easier because the naming system adopts the same system as, for example, polygons. So you've got five carbons, which is pentane, as in pentagon, hexane, as in hexagon, heptane, as in heptagon, and then octane, which is a substance that you're very familiar with. That's petrol. It's what you put in your car, okay, to help it go. And then after that you'd have nonane, and then decane, etc. So that's the naming system sorted. All of these end with ane. So going back again to where we started, let's give the molecules a molecular formula. Right, so methane is CH4. So notice the difference between the molecular formula and the structural formula, because sometimes you may well be asked these in an exam, and you need to know the difference. Okay, and then you've got ethane, this time C2, H6. Then we've got propane, C3, H8. Then we've got butane, C4, H10. And then a bit higher up the chain, C5H12 for pentane, C6H14 for hexane, etc. Now what we need to recognize here is that there is a pattern here in these formulas, and this pattern can be described by what we mentioned earlier, which is the general formula. So the general formula for the alkanes is this. It is CN and then H, and then you have 2N plus 2. What do we mean by N? Well, N is the number of the term. So methane is the first member of the series with N equals 1. And then ethane is the second member, N equals 2. Then propane, the third member, N equals 3. Then butane, the fourth member, N equals 4, etc. So using this formula, we can say that the nth member will have N carbon atoms and 2N plus 2 hydrogen atoms. That's all that means. So for example, let's take propane. This is the third member, N equals 3. So we substitute 3 for N. And then H equals 2 times N, which is 6, plus 2, which is 8. So from this general formula, we can calculate the specific formula for the third member in the series. Okay, so that would be for propane. Now, if for some weird reason I wanted to know, for example, what was the 37th member in the series of alkanes, then I can look to the general formula. I can see that will be C 37 with H, and then 2 times 37, which is 74, plus 2, 76 hydrogens. Okay, so putting a box around that now, we can say that this is the general formula for the homologous series of the alkanes, and we'll look at other general formulas later on when we look at alkenes and alcohols, etc. Now, with regard to the naming system for alkanes, there is one further thing I'd like to mention. As I said earlier, the naming system for the first 4 in the series is a little bit tricky. After that it becomes quite easy because they just adopt the same system as, for example, polygons. But the first 4 is a bit tricky, so I'm going to give you a mnemonic to help you do that, and the mnemonic is mice eat peanut butter. That's mice, M for methane, eat, E for ethane, peanut, P for propane, butter, B for butane. After that it becomes easier. Okay, so that'll help you remember the first 4. The same system could also be used, for example, in the case of remembering the names for the alcohols, but we'll come to that in a later lesson.